A cheating husband strides into a world-class, five-star resort with his young mistress on his arm, expecting a weekend of uninterrupted luxury. He demands the best suite, acts like he owns the place, and revels in his own invincibility. But he doesn't own the place. As the concierge hands over the gold-plated room keys with a knowing smile, the husband has no idea he just walked right into a $50 million trap. Because the true owner of this lavish playground, the wife he left at home, David Mercer, loved the narrative of his own life. At 39, he was the senior vice president of acquisitions at a prominent commercial real estate firm in Chicago. He drove a sleek, obsidian-black Porsche 911, wore bespoke Italian suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and possessed the kind of arrogant charisma that commanded attention in any boardroom. He firmly believed he was the architect of his own success, a self-made titan who had clawed his way up the corporate ladder through sheer grit and unmatched brilliance. In David's mind, his wife, Serafina, was a lovely but entirely dependent fixture in his grand, successful life. Serafina and David had been married for 8 years. To the outside world, and especially to David, she was a quiet, refined woman who worked part-time as an independent art appraiser. She spent her days attending gallery openings, reading thick hardcover novels in their sunlit conservatory, and managing the household. David knew Serafina came from a wealthy family, the Harringtons of Boston, but he fundamentally misunderstood the nature of that wealth. Early in their relationship, Serafina had explained that her family's money was tied up in a labyrinth of generational trusts, strictly controlled by a board of conservative trustees. She lived on a modest monthly allowance, she told him, preferring a simple life free from the suffocating pressures of high society. David loved this dynamic. It fed his ego to be the primary breadwinner. He paid the mortgage on their multi-million-dollar Lincoln Park brownstone. He funded their vacations to the Amalfi Coast and St. Bart's. He bought her diamond tennis bracelets for their anniversaries. He needed to be the powerful one, the provider, the man who had rescued a blue-blood heiress from her restrictive family and given her a real life. What David did not know, what no one outside of a very small, highly discreet circle of wealth managers and corporate attorneys knew, was that Serafina's father, William Harrington, had quietly dissolved those restrictive trusts before his passing 5 years ago. Serafina wasn't just an heir. She was the sole, uncontested owner of Harrington Holdings, a shadow conglomerate with diversified assets in commercial shipping, tech startups, and luxury hospitality spanning 3 continents. Serafina's modest allowance was a cover story. Her part-time art appraising was a genuine passion project to keep her grounded. In reality, Serafina Mercer was worth roughly $2 billion. She kept this a secret not out of malice, but out of a deep-seated desire for a normal marriage. She had seen how money poisoned relationships, how it attracted sycophants and shattered trust. She wanted David to love her for her, and for years she believed he did. But as David's career accelerated, so did his ego. The man she married, ambitious but grounded, began to morph into someone unrecognizable. He became obsessed with status, networking, and the validation of his peers. He started working late, citing endless client dinners and emergency acquisition meetings. Then came Emma. Emma Jenkins was 23, fresh out of a mid-tier university, and newly hired as a marketing coordinator at David's firm. She was objectively stunning, with a sharp, calculated ambition hidden behind a bubbly, wide-eyed facade. She didn't just want a job, she wanted a lifestyle. When she noticed the senior VP with the expensive watch and the wedding ring lingering near her desk, she saw an opportunity. David was easy prey. He was approaching 40, feeling the subtle, nagging dread of middle age, and Emma's unabashed admiration was a potent drug. It started with innocent coffees, escalated to late-night drinks to discuss her career trajectory, and inevitably culminated in a heated, secret affair. For 6 months, David lived a double life. He told himself he deserved it. He worked hard. He provided for his wife, and he was a master of the universe. Why shouldn't he have a beautiful young woman who looked at him like he was a god? He was careful, of course. He used burner credit cards, communicated with Emma on a hidden messaging app, and orchestrated their meetings with military precision. As winter approached, David decided to reward himself and his mistress. He planned a lavish, 4-day weekend getaway. The cover story for Serafina was simple and foolproof. A high-stakes real estate conference in Denver, followed by a weekend networking retreat in the mountains. The actual plan was far more glamorous. He had booked the newly renovated, ultra-exclusive Alpine Crown Resort in Aspen, Colorado. It was a legendary 5-star property, known for its breathtaking mountain views, its Michelin-starred restaurant, and its absolute discretion. It was the playground of billionaires, celebrities, and royalty. At $5,000 a night for a standard suite, it was a massive splurge. But David wanted to impress Emma. He wanted to show her what life could be like with a man of his stature. He booked the flights. He secured the reservations. He packed his finest cashmere sweaters and his most expensive cologne. He thought he had thought of everything. He thought he was untouchable. He was dead wrong. Serafina Mercer was not a fool. You do not manage a multi-billion-dollar empire from the shadows without possessing a razor-sharp intellect and an impeccable eye for detail. The unraveling of David's perfect crime did not begin with a lipstick stain on a collar or a lingering scent of cheap perfume. It began with a microscopic shift in his behavior. David had always been a deeply scheduled man, but suddenly his rhythm was off. He started guarding his phone, placing it face down on the granite kitchen island. He changed his passcode from their wedding anniversary to something random. He was more irritable, more defensive, yet occasionally, out of nowhere, he would buy Serafina lavish, guilt-ridden gifts, like a vintage Cartier watch she hadn't asked for. The definitive proof arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning in late October. David had rushed out to an early meeting, leaving his iPad on his bedside table. It was an older device, one he rarely used anymore, but it was still connected to his primary Apple ID. Serafina was in the bedroom, folding laundry, when the iPad screen lit up with a notification. It wasn't a text message. David had been smart enough to disable those on his secondary devices. It was a calendar notification. Flight DL-482, Chicago to Aspen. Confirmation for D. Mercer. C. Jenkins. Serafina stared at the screen. The air in the room seemed to turn to ice. C. Jenkins. She recognized the name immediately. Emma Jenkins. David had mentioned her a few times months ago, describing her as a promising but naive new hire in the marketing department. A lesser woman might have screamed. She might have thrown the iPad against the wall, called her husband in a hysterical rage, or driven down to his office to cause a public scene. Serafina did none of those things. She sat on the edge of the perfectly made bed, her posture immaculately straight, and took a slow, deep breath. The betrayal was a physical ache in her chest, a sharp, twisting knife of humiliation and heartbreak. 8 years of marriage, built on a foundation of lies. He was flying his 23-year-old subordinate to a ski resort while telling his wife he was working. The sadness lasted for exactly 10 minutes. Then the grief curdled into something much more dangerous, cold, calculated fury. Serafina picked up her own encrypted phone and dialed a number she rarely used. It belonged to Richard Davies, a former intelligence officer who now ran the most elite private investigation firm in the Midwest. He was on a retainer for Harrington Holdings, usually tasked with vetting potential CEOs and investigating corporate espionage. Today, his target was much closer to home. "Good morning, Mrs. Mercer." Richard's gravelly voice came through the line. "How can I assist you?" "Richard, I need a comprehensive dossier on a woman named Emma Jenkins. She works in marketing at David's firm. Furthermore, I need you to track David's personal financials, specifically any hidden accounts or unlisted credit cards. Lastly, I need the complete itinerary for a trip he is taking to Aspen next Thursday. Consider it done. You'll have the preliminary file by tonight." True to his word, the encrypted file arrived in Serafina's inbox at 8:00 p.m. She sat in her dark home office, a glass of expensive Bordeaux in hand, reading through the destruction of her marriage. Richard had uncovered the burner credit card. He had pulled the restaurant receipts from their romantic dinners across town. He had even secured security camera stills from a boutique hotel downtown, showing David and Emma walking into the lobby, his hand resting possessively on her lower back. But the most critical piece of information was the Aspen itinerary. David had booked a 4-night stay at the Alpine Crown Resort. When Serafina saw the name of the hotel, a slow, grim smile spread across her face. It was a smile devoid of any warmth. The Alpine Crown Resort was a legendary establishment. It had recently fallen on hard times due to mismanagement by its previous ownership group. Just 3 weeks ago, it had been quietly acquired in a massive, all-cash buyout. The purchasing entity was a Delaware-based shell company called Summit Hospitality, LLC. Summit Hospitality, LLC was a wholly owned subsidiary of Harrington Holdings. Serafina owned the Alpine Crown Resort. Every brick, every chandelier, every thread count of the Egyptian cotton sheets. She was currently in the middle of authorizing a $40 million renovation budget for the property. David, the great architect of his own destiny, the man who thought he was so incredibly clever, was taking his mistress to his wife's hotel. Serafina picked up her phone and made a second call. This time, she dialed Arthur Pendleton, the fiercely loyal 60-something British expatriate who served as the managing director of Harrington Holdings' hospitality division. Arthur was currently on site in Aspen, overseeing the transition of the hotel's management. "Arthur," Serafina said, her voice smooth and steady. "I'm looking at the upcoming guest manifest for the Alpine Crown." "Yes, Mrs. Mercer. We are operating at 80% capacity for the upcoming weekend. The transition has been seamless." "Excellent. I want you to locate a reservation under the name David Mercer." There was a brief pause, followed by the sound of typing. "Ah, yes. Mr. David Mercer. Checking in next Thursday for a 4-night stay. He has booked an executive king suite. Is your husband coming to inspect the property on your behalf, Mrs. Mercer? No, Arthur. My husband is completely unaware of my connection to the property. He is traveling under the guise of a business trip, and he will be accompanied by a young woman named Emma Jenkins. He believes he is executing a flawless secret rendezvous. Arthur, a man of worldly experience and impeccable manners, did not gasp, but the silence on the line spoke volumes. I see, he finally said, his tone turning dangerously protective. How would you like to proceed, ma'am? Shall I cancel the reservation? Have them turned away at the door? Absolutely not, Serafina replied, her eyes locked on the surveillance photo of David and his mistress. I want them to have a weekend they will never, ever forget. I am flying out to Aspen on Tuesday, 2 days before they arrive. I want you to upgrade Mr. Mercer to the owner's reserve suite. And Arthur? Yes, Mrs. Mercer? I am going to need your help setting a stage. We are going to provide Mr. Mercer with the highest level of VIP service the hotel has ever seen. We are going to cater to his every whim. But we are going to do it in a way that slowly, methodically, drives him out of his mind. It would be my absolute pleasure, Mrs. Mercer. We shall roll out the blood-red carpet. Thursday afternoon arrived in Aspen with a brilliant, blinding sunshine that bounced off the fresh powder of the Rocky Mountains. David's rented luxury SUV pulled up to the grand, timber-framed entrance of the Alpine Crown Resort. Emma, sitting in the passenger seat, practically vibrated with excitement. She was dressed in head-to-toe designer winter wear, most of which David had purchased for her the day before. David, this place is insane, she gasped, looking up at the towering stone chimneys and the fleet of valets rushing out to meet them. I've only seen this hotel on Instagram. I can't believe we're actually here. David smirked, popping the trunk and tossing the keys to a waiting valet. I told you, Emma. I only do the best. When you're with me, you're at the top. He puffed out his chest as they walked through the massive, hand-carved mahogany double doors into the lobby. The interior was breathtaking. A massive 4-story roaring fireplace anchored the room, surrounded by plush leather armchairs, antler chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the snow-capped peaks. David strode confidently to the marble front desk, Emma clinging to his arm. Reservation for David Mercer, he announced to the impeccably dressed clerk, sliding his platinum credit card across the stone counter. Executive King Suite. The clerk looked at the screen, and a subtle shift occurred in his posture. He pressed a hidden button beneath the desk. Ah, Mr. Mercer, welcome to the Alpine Crown, the clerk said smoothly. Please, just a moment. Our general manager would like to greet you personally. David shot Emma a smug look. See, his eyes said. VIP treatment. Seconds later, Arthur Pendleton appeared from a back office. He was a tall, distinguished man with silver hair, wearing a bespoke 3-piece suit. He approached David with a warm, professional smile that did not quite reach his cold, calculating eyes. Mr. Mercer, I am Arthur Pendleton, the managing director of the property. We are incredibly honored to have you with us this weekend. David straightened his collar, eating up the attention. Nice to meet you, Arthur. I've heard great things about your establishment, hoping for a quiet, relaxing weekend. And you shall have it, Arthur promised. In fact, Mr. Mercer, we noted your reservation and, as a token of our appreciation for choosing the Alpine Crown, we have taken the liberty of upgrading you. David's eyebrows raised. Oh? To what? To the owner's reserve suite, sir. It is our most exclusive accommodation, occupying the entire top floor of the West Wing. Private elevator, panoramic wraparound balcony, a personal cedar sauna, and a dedicated butler available 24 hours a day. It is unparalleled. Emma let out a literal squeal, squeezing David's bicep. David chuckled, attempting to look nonchalant. Well, Arthur, I appreciate that. Good customer service goes a long way. We'll happily accept. Excellent. Your luggage is already being brought up. Allow me to escort you to your private elevator. As Arthur led the oblivious couple through the lobby, he mentally checked off the first box of Seraphina's meticulous plan. The trap was officially sprung. The owner's reserve suite was, as promised, a masterpiece of luxury. Vaulted timber ceilings, a massive stone fireplace that ignited with the flick of a switch, and a sprawling, king-sized bed covered in a mountain of fur throws. Emma immediately ran to the floor-to-ceiling windows, filming a video for her close friends list on social media. David walked to the center of the room, dropping his briefcase, feeling like the king of the world. Then he noticed the details. On the massive dining table sat a welcome arrangement. It was a massive, sprawling bouquet of pristine white peonies. David frowned slightly. White peonies were notoriously difficult to source in the dead of winter. More importantly, they were Seraphina's absolute favorite flower. Their house in Chicago was always filled with them when they were in season. He shook his head. Just a coincidence. High-end hotels have high-end flowers. He walked over to the dry bar to pour himself a drink. Sitting on a silver tray was a decanter, and next to it, an unopened bottle of scotch. David's breath hitched. It wasn't just any scotch. It was a bottle of the Macallan, 1977, fine and rare. It was a spectacularly expensive, impossibly rare vintage. It was also the exact same bottle that Seraphina had tracked down and gifted him for their 5th wedding anniversary. "Look at this place!" Emma yelled from the bedroom, interrupting his thoughts. "David, they even have a custom playlist going on the sound system." David listened. The soft, sweeping sounds of a string quartet filled the air. He recognized the melody instantly. It was Claire de Lune by Debussy. The song Seraphina had walked down the aisle to. A cold, uneasy prickle started at the base of David's neck. The flowers, the scotch, the music. It was too specific. It felt like a ghost was in the room with him. "Stop it," he told himself. "You're being paranoid. It's a luxury hotel. They know you're a high net worth individual. Their concierge probably just scraped your public profiles or something to personalize the room. That's what these places do." He forcefully pushed the anxiety down, uncorked the scotch, and poured himself a heavy glass. He was not going to let a few weird coincidences ruin his victory lap. "Get dressed, babe," David called out to Emma, downing the scotch in one burning gulp. "We have dinner reservations at the chef's table downstairs in an hour. We're going all out." An hour later, David and Emma descended the private elevator to the hotel's flagship restaurant, Lumina. The maitre d' greeted them by name and escorted them to the most exclusive table in the house, a semi-private alcove, surrounded by frosted glass, offering a view of the open kitchen. The service was flawless. The champagne flowed. Emma was giggling, enamored with the caviar and the truffle-shaved risotto. David was finally starting to relax, the paranoia of the suite fading away beneath the warmth of the alcohol and his mistress's adoration. They were finishing their main course when Arthur Pendleton approached the table. "Mr. Mercer, Miss Jenkins, I trust the meal is to your satisfaction? Arthur asked, his hands clasped behind his back. Incredible, Arthur. Best steak I've had in years, David beamed, leaning back in his chair. You run a tight ship. I appreciate the compliment, sir, Arthur said, his expression completely unreadable. I apologize for the interruption, but a situation has arisen. David frowned, his defensive corporate instincts flaring up. A situation? Is there a problem with my card? Oh no, Mr. Mercer. Nothing so pedestrian, Arthur replied smoothly. It is simply that the owner of the hotel has arrived on the property this evening. David laughed arrogantly. The owner? Well, given the upgrade, they must know who I am. They want to say hello? I'm always happy to network with fellow heavyweights. Arthur didn't blink. Yes, the owner is fully aware of who you are, Mr. Mercer. And yes, the owner explicitly requested an audience with you. Right now, we're in the middle of dinner. The owner insisted, Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a subtle, undeniable weight of command. If you would please follow me to the private dining room. It will only take a moment. Miss Jenkins can wait here and enjoy dessert. Emma looked confused but smiled. Go on, babe. Go do your business thing. I'll order the chocolate souffle. David stood up, adjusting his suit jacket, feeling a surge of self-importance. The billionaire owner of the Alpine Crown wanted a private meeting with him. This was exactly where he belonged. This was his level. He followed Arthur out of the main dining room, down a quiet, dimly lit corridor, lined with vintage wine cellars. At the end of the hall were heavy oak double doors, guarded by two large men in dark suits. Arthur stepped forward and opened the doors, gesturing for David to enter. The owner will see you now, Mr. Mercer. David stepped into the room. It was a stunning private dining space, dominated by a long mahogany table illuminated by a single, dramatic crystal chandelier. At the far end of the table, sitting in a high-backed leather chair, a solitary figure was waiting in the shadows. As David walked further into the room, the doors clicked shut and locked behind him. The figure at the end of the table leaned forward into the light of the chandelier. She was wearing a stunning, tailored emerald green evening gown. Around her neck was the diamond tennis bracelet David had bought her 3 years ago. In her hand, she held a crystal glass of Bordeaux. David stopped dead in his tracks. The blood drained from his face so fast he felt dizzy. His knees instantly turned to water. His brain misfired, struggling to process the impossible image before him. "Hello, David," Serafina said. Her voice was perfectly calm, echoing slightly in the silent room. "I hope you are enjoying my hotel." For a full 30 seconds, the only sound in the opulent private dining room was the soft, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. David's mind scrambled violently, desperately searching for a lifeline, a lie, a plausible excuse. His mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish. He looked from the perfectly tailored emerald gown to the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist, the one he had bought her. "Serafina," he finally choked out, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched rasp. What are you doing here in Denver?" Serafina took a slow, deliberate sip of her Bordeaux. Her gaze was piercing, stripped of the warm, affectionate wife he had known for 8 years. In her place sat a woman of terrifying authority. "Denver, David?" she asked, her voice laced with chilling amusement. "I suppose geography was never your strong suit. We are in Aspen. Specifically, We are standing in the private dining quarters of the Alpine Crown Resort. David took a shaky step forward, his corporate survival instincts kicking in. He tried to project righteous indignation, the tactic that always worked in the boardroom. Serafina, this is insane. Are you following me? I am on a highly sensitive business trip. I have clients waiting for me upstairs. You cannot just ambush me like this. Serafina slowly placed her wine glass on the table. The sharp clink of crystal on mahogany echoed like a gunshot. A sensitive business trip, she repeated softly. With your 23-year-old marketing coordinator, Emma Jenkins. Is she the client, David? Because my security team has footage of you feeding her truffle risotto not 50 feet from this room. David's face drained of the last remaining drop of color. His legs gave out, and he collapsed heavily into one of the leather dining chairs. The game was up. The undeniable truth was staring him in the face, yet his ego demanded one last, desperate attempt at deflection. How did you get in here? David stammered, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. This is an ultra-exclusive resort. You can't just bribe your way into a private room. Who let you in? No one let me in, David, Serafina said, leaning forward into the light. I let myself in. I own this hotel. David blinked, his brain completely short-circuiting. You what? Don't be ridiculous, Serafina. You're an art appraiser. You live on a family allowance. A sharp, mirthless laugh escaped Serafina's lips. It was a sound David had never heard before. Oh, my sweet, arrogant husband. You were always so eager to play the hero, the great provider, the self-made master of the universe. You never once bothered to look past the surface. She reached beneath the table and produced a sleek, leather-bound portfolio. She slid it smoothly across the polished wood. It stopped precisely in front of David. Open it, she commanded. Trembling, David flipped the cover open. Inside was a dense legal document, embossed with the seal of the state of Delaware. It was the Articles of Incorporation for Summit Hospitality, LLC. And right there, listed as the sole proprietor and CEO, was Serafina Harrington Mercer. Below it was a financial summary of Harrington Holdings, detailing a diversified global portfolio with a net asset value of $2.1 billion. My father dissolved the trusts before he died, Serafina explained, her tone icy and analytical. I have been the sole executive chairman of Harrington Holdings for 5 years. While you were bragging about closing a $10 million warehouse acquisition in the suburbs, I was quietly purchasing commercial skyscrapers in Manhattan and luxury resorts in the Rockies. This hotel, this room, the chair you are sitting in, it all belongs to me. David stared at the documents, his world entirely inverting. The power dynamic of their entire marriage had been a mirage. He wasn't the provider. He was a financially insignificant ant living in the shadow of a leviathan. You lied to me, David whispered, a sudden irrational spark of anger flaring in his chest. For 8 years you lied to my face. I protected myself, Serafina countered, her voice hardening into steel. And given that you are currently on a romantic getaway with a girl young enough to be your daughter, funded by the bonus you received from a firm I practically own, I would say my instincts were dead on. David flinched. Wait, what do you mean, a firm you practically own? Your employer, Harrison & Ford Commercial Real Estate, Serafina said casually, inspecting her manicure. Who do you think owns the high-rise your firm operates in? Who do you think holds the primary debt on your firm's largest expansion project? Harrington Holdings. I had a lovely conversation with your CEO, Richard Harrison, this morning. We discussed his lease renewal, and we discussed the gross violation of company policy regarding senior executives sleeping with subordinate employees. Tears of pure, unadulterated panic finally pricked David's eyes. Serafina, please, please. You have to understand. It was a mistake. A midlife crisis. She means absolutely nothing to me. I love you. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. Stop groveling, David. It's pathetic, Serafina snapped, rising gracefully from her chair. I didn't bring you in here to listen to your apologies. I brought you in here to deliver a message. She walked slowly toward him, the train of her gown brushing softly against the Persian rug. She stopped just inches from him, looking down at the broken, sweating man she had once called her husband. As of 2 hours ago, my attorneys filed for divorce in Cook County, Serafina stated, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. Your personal assets have been frozen. Your keycard to the Chicago brownstone has been deactivated, and your belongings have been packed and placed in a storage unit on the south side. Serafina, you can't do this. I am doing it, David. And one last thing, before I let you get back to your dessert. She smiled, a predatory curve of her lips. I hope you enjoyed the owner's reserve suite and the 1977 Macallan. Because as a soon-to-be ex-husband and who just violated his marital vows, you are no longer considered my guest. You are a paying customer. With that, Serafina turned on her heel and walked toward a concealed side door. Serafina, wait, what am I supposed to do? David begged, his voice echoing off the mahogany walls. She paused at the threshold, looking over her shoulder one last time. I suggest you check the limit on your credit cards, David. Have a wonderful evening. The door clicked shut, leaving David utterly, horrifyingly alone. David stumbled out of the private dining room a few minutes later, feeling as though he had been hit by a freight train. The warm, ambient lighting of the hallway felt harsh and disorienting. The soft jazz playing in the background sounded like funeral music. He walked back into the main dining area of Lumina on autopilot, his vision blurring. Every step felt like he was walking through wet cement. He had walked into this restaurant as a titan. He was walking out as an unemployed, soon-to-be-divorced, financially ruined fraud. He approached his semi-private alcove. Emma was happily taking a selfie with a decadent chocolate soufflé, her diamond earrings, which David had bought on his now-frozen joint credit card, sparkling in the candlelight. There you are, Emma beamed, putting her phone down. Did you close the deal? You look a little pale, babe. Do you need some water? David sank into his chair, staring blankly at her. For the first time, he didn't see a beautiful, adoring young woman. He saw the catalyst of his absolute destruction. Emma, he started, his voice barely a whisper. We have to leave. Leave? She frowned, pouting her lips. But I haven't even finished my soufflé. And we have the private sauna booked for tonight. What's wrong? Before David could formulate a lie, their sharply dressed waiter appeared at the table, carrying a sleek black leather checkbook. Close behind him stood Arthur Pendleton, his hands clasped firmly behind his back, looking entirely devoid of his earlier hospitality. Gentlemen, David said, trying to muster a shred of his former authority, though his voice shook. Put it on my room tab. Arthur stepped forward. I'm afraid that will not be possible, Mr. Mercer. Given your sudden change in status with the hotel's ownership, we are required to settle all outstanding balances immediately. Emma laughed, clearly thinking it was a joke. "David, just give them your black card. Let's go upstairs." David swallowed hard. With shaking hands, he pulled out his heavy metal corporate card and placed it on the tray. The waiter picked it up and walked to a nearby terminal. Seconds later, the waiter returned. "Declined, sir." David's heart hammered against his ribs. Serafina wasn't bluffing. He pulled out his personal platinum card. "Try this one." The waiter swiped it. "Declined, sir." Emma's smile vanished. The couple at the table next to them, a famous tech billionaire and his wife, briefly stopped talking, glancing over at the commotion. "Try it again," David hissed, sweat dripping down his temples. "Mr. Mercer," Arthur said loudly, his crisp British accent carrying across the dining room. "Your cards are returning a hard decline due to a total freeze on your accounts. Furthermore, I have been instructed to present you with the revised bill for your stay." Arthur handed David an itemized invoice. David's eyes darted down the page. "Owner's Reserve Suite, 1 night, $15,000. In-room florals, custom peonies, $1,200. 1977. The Macallan Fine and Rare, $12,500. Lumina Dinner, $850. Total due immediately, $29,550. "This is extortion," David gasped, his voice cracking. "I thought the room was a complimentary upgrade." "Complimentary upgrades are reserved for valued guests of the owner, Mr. Mercer," Arthur replied coldly. "You, sir, are most certainly not a valued guest. You are a liability." Emma snatched the bill from David's hands. Her eyes went wide. $29,000? David, what is going on? Pay the man so we can leave." At that exact moment, David's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. It was a high-priority email from Richard Harrison, the CEO of his firm. Subject: immediate termination of employment. David, effective immediately. You are terminated with cause. Your relationship with Ms. Jenkins violates Section 4 of our corporate conduct policy. Do not return to the office. Security will hail your personal fix. The phone slipped from David's fingers, clattering onto the marble floor. I don't have the money," David whispered, looking at Arthur. My wife froze my accounts. I've been fired." Emma dropped the bill as if it were on fire. "Your wife? Wait, you're fired? You said you were a partner. You said you had millions." She stood up so fast, her chair scraped loudly against the floor. The entire restaurant was watching them now. "Miss Jenkins," Arthur said, turning his icy gaze to the young woman, "I suggest you concern yourself with your own logistics. The owner has requested that both of you vacate the property immediately." "Vacate?" David pleaded. "Arthur, be reasonable. It's 10 degrees outside, and it's snowing. Where are we supposed to go?" "That is no longer the concern of the Alpine Crown Resort," Arthur stated. He snapped his fingers, and 2 massive security guards in dark suits stepped out of the shadows, flanking the table. "Your luggage has already been packed by our staff. It is waiting for you by the front doors." "You can't do this!" David shouted, his humiliation boiling over into blind rage. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes, Mr. Mercer," Arthur said, a rare, terrifying smile crossing his face. "You are a man who brought his mistress to his wife's hotel. Now you will leave quietly, or my security team will drag you out by the collar of that very expensive, unpaid-for suit." There was no negotiation. The security guards stepped forward, their massive hands firmly gripping David and Emma by the arms. The walk through the Alpine Crown was the longest walk of David's life. The lobby, previously a space of welcoming luxury, now felt like an arena of public execution. Guests whispered and pointed as the security team marched the struggling, crying Emma and the pale, defeated David toward the exit. They were pushed through the grand mahogany doors, stumbling out into the freezing, biting wind of the aspen night. "My car!" David yelled to the valet. "Bring me my rental SUV." The valet, perfectly composed in his heavy winter coat, shook his head. "I'm sorry, sir." The rental agency was notified that the credit card on file was flagged for fraud due to the freeze. They dispatched a tow truck 20 minutes ago. The vehicle has been repossessed. David stood frozen on the icy cobblestones. No car, no money, no job, no wife. He looked down at his feet. Sitting in the snow were his 2 expensive leather suitcases and Emma's designer duffel bags. Emma was shivering uncontrollably in her thin evening dress, sobbing hysterically. "You ruined my life. I lost my job. How are we supposed to get to the airport?" David Mercer, the self-made titan of industry, looked out into the unforgiving darkness of the snowy mountain pass. He had absolutely no idea. The biting wind of the Colorado mountains is unforgiving, even to those dressed in thousands of dollars of designer outerwear. For David Mercer, shivering on the icy cobblestones outside the Alpine Crown Resort, the cold was secondary to the crushing weight of his newly obliterated reality. He stood frozen, his breath pluming in the freezing air, staring at his expensive leather luggage discarded in the snow. Beside him, Emma Jenkins was vibrating with a cocktail of hypothermia and raw, unadulterated fury. "Do something!" Emma shrieked, her voice cracking as the freezing wind whipped her hair across her face. "You cannot just stand there. Call an Uber. Oh! Call a taxi. Call a helicopter for all I care. Just get us out of here." David clumsily pulled his phone from his overcoat pocket with trembling, numb fingers. He opened his ride-sharing app, typing in the address for the nearest regional airport. The screen loaded, displaying a $60 fare. He hit confirm. A red banner flashed across the top of his screen. "Payment method declined. Please update your billing information." He let out a pathetic, suffocating gasp. Serafina's freeze was absolute. It wasn't just his high-limit credit cards. It was his digital wallets, his checking accounts, his emergency funds. Everything was tied to the financial ecosystem that she secretly controlled. "My apps are blocked," David whispered, staring blankly at the glowing screen. "Everything is blocked." Emma snatched the phone from his hands, her eyes wide with panic and dawning realization. She stared at the red banner, then looked up at David, her expression morphing from desperation to disgust. The illusion of the powerful, wealthy executive had shattered completely. In his place stood a broken, middle-aged man with no money, no car, and no power. "You're completely broke," Emma said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "You lied to me. You aren't a partner. You aren't a millionaire. You were just living off your wife." "Emma, please," David begged, reaching out a trembling hand. "I can fix this. I have friends in Chicago. I can call my attorney." "Your attorney," Emma scoffed, slapping his hand away. "You were just fired. I was just fired because of you. Do you have any idea what you've done to my career? I have student loans. I have rent." "We'll figure it out together," David pleaded, his voice breaking. "Just use your card for a cab to a cheap motel. We'll regroup in the morning." Emma looked at him as if he were a dying insect on the pavement. Her survival instincts, sharp and ruthless, kicked in. She pulled out her own phone, opened her own app, and ordered a premium SUV using her personal emergency credit card. "There is no we, David," she spat, zipping her designer coat up to her chin. "I'm going to the airport. I'm flying back to Chicago, and I am calling an employment lawyer the second I land. I am going to sue you, and I am going to sue the firm for wrongful termination." "Emma, you can't leave me here. I don't have a dime." "That sounds like a you problem," she said coldly. 10 minutes later, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. The driver stepped out, loaded Emma's bags into the trunk, and opened the door for her. She climbed in without looking back. As the vehicle pulled away, disappearing down the winding mountain road, David Mercer was left entirely alone in the snow. Desperation is a powerful motivator. David spent the next hour making humiliating phone calls. He called his best friend and college roommate, Greg, a corporate lawyer in Manhattan. "Greg, man, I need a massive favor," David chattered into the phone, seeking shelter behind a decorative stone pillar to block the wind. "I'm stranded in Aspen. My cards are locked. I need you to wire me $5,000 immediately." There was a long, heavy silence on the line. "David," Greg said softly, "I just got off the phone with Serafina's legal team. They served me with a subpoena regarding our golf trip to Miami last spring. The one where you brought that marketing girl." David's stomach dropped into a bottomless abyss. "Greg, please. Serafina's lawyers made it very clear that anyone aiding you in hiding assets or assisting you financially during this transition will be heavily scrutinized," Greg continued, his tone purely transactional. "I'm sorry, David. You crossed the wrong woman. Lose my number." The line went dead. He called 3 other colleagues. 2 sent him straight to voicemail. The third answered only to tell him that HR had already circulated a company-wide email about his immediate termination for gross misconduct. He was a pariah, a radioactive ghost in the corporate world he thought he conquered. With his phone battery dipping to 2%, David dragged his heavy, snow-covered suitcases 3 miles down the shoulder of the mountain road in the pitch black. His custom Italian leather shoes were ruined, his toes entirely numb. He finally reached a brightly lit 24-hour gas station on the outskirts of the ski town. He walked inside, ignoring the bewildered stare of the teenage cashier, and collapsed onto a plastic chair near the coffee machines. He had $24 in cash in his wallet. He bought a burnt black coffee for $2, a stale cellophane-wrapped pastry, and spent the night huddled in the corner of the gas station, shivering in his bespoke suit, staring at the frozen parking lot. For the first time in his life, David Mercer had absolutely nothing. 6 months later, the skyline of Chicago gleamed under the bright afternoon sun, casting long, sharp shadows across the bustling streets of the financial district. Inside the newly renovated penthouse boardroom of the Harrington Holdings Tower, Serafina Mercer. Now legally, entirely, and triumphantly, Serafina Harrington again sat at the head of a massive glass conference table. She wore a sharp, minimalist charcoal suit, holding a silver pen as she reviewed a stack of acquisition documents. "The transition of the Alpine Crown property has been a phenomenal success, Ms. Harrington," Arthur Pendleton said, projecting a quarterly earnings report onto the screen. "Occupancy is up 30%, and the new Michelin-starred chef has secured reservations 6 months in advance. The renovation budget you approved has already paid for itself." Serafina smiled, a genuine expression of quiet confidence. "Excellent work, Arthur. Proceed with the planned expansion for the south wing." Her life had become a masterclass in efficiency and power since the divorce. The legal proceedings had been astonishingly brief. Because Serafina's wealth was legally protected under an ironclad prenuptial agreement tied to her father's trusts, which David had arrogantly signed without reading properly 8 years ago, he was entitled to absolutely nothing of the Harrington empire. I was awarded half the equity of the Lincoln Park brownstone, which Serafina immediately bought out in cash. However, after the penalties for his massive unpaid credit card debts, the legal fees, and the hefty settlement Emma Jenkins had extracted from him to avoid a messy public workplace harassment lawsuit, David's share was decimated. Serafina signed the final page of the acquisition file and handed it to her assistant. She stood up, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below. She didn't feel bitter. She didn't feel vindictive. She felt utterly, blissfully free. She had shed a parasite and emerged as the apex predator of her own life. Miles away, on the far west side of the city, David Mercer was experiencing a very different kind of afternoon. The cramped one-bedroom apartment smelled perpetually of boiled cabbage and damp carpet. David sat on a thrift store sofa, wearing a faded polo shirt and khakis, staring blankly at a muted television. He looked 10 years older. The arrogance that had once defined his posture was gone, replaced by a permanent, exhausted slump. He had lost weight, and the designer haircuts had been replaced by cheap, uneven trims. The corporate real estate world in Chicago was a remarkably small, highly communicative ecosystem. Once word spread of why he was fired from Harrison & Ford and who his ex-wife actually was, no reputable firm would touch him. He was a walking liability who had spectacularly failed the ultimate test of discretion and judgment. After months of rejected applications and dwindling savings, survival forced his hand. The former senior vice president of acquisitions was now an assistant property manager for a low-tier, aggressively mismanaged strip mall in the suburbs. His daily routine consisted of unclogging drains, arguing with furious tenants over parking spaces, and taking orders from a regional manager who was 10 years his junior. David checked his cheap wristwatch. It was time for his shift. He grabbed his keys, walked out of the dingy apartment, and headed toward the bus stop. His repossessed Porsche was a distant, painful memory. He now relied on public transit, standing in the rain and snow with the very people he used to look down upon from his corner office. As he stepped off the bus near the downtown transfer station, a sudden downpour began. Cursing under his breath, David jogged toward the shelter of a nearby newsstand to wait out the rain. He stood under the green awning, shaking the water from his cheap jacket. He glanced idly at the magazine racks lining the wall. His eyes locked onto the center display. It was the latest issue of Global Business and Finance. The cover featured a stunning, high-resolution portrait of a woman looking directly into the camera with an expression of unyielding authority and grace. She was wearing a familiar emerald green evening gown. The bold, gold-foiled headline across the cover read, "The Shadow Billionaire: How Serafina Harrington Built an Empire," while nobody was watching. Below it, a smaller sub-headline read, "Exclusive Interview on Her Latest $500 million Hospitality Takeover." David stopped breathing. He stepped closer to the rack, his trembling hand reaching out to touch the glossy paper. The woman on the cover looked like a goddess. She looked untouchable. He stared at the face of the woman who had packed his lunches, the woman who had quietly read books in their sunroom, the woman who had genuinely loved him for exactly who he was, until he decided she wasn't enough. "You gonna buy that, buddy?" The gruff voice of the newsstand vendor snapped, breaking David out of his trance. "This ain't a library. $5 or move along." David quickly pulled his hand back, as if the magazine had burned him. He reached into his fingers brushing against a few loose coins and a crumpled $1 bill. "No," David whispered, his voice cracking with a profound, suffocating sorrow. "I can't afford it." He stepped out from under the awning, pulling his collar up against his neck, and walked back out into the freezing, relentless rain. He had spent his entire life trying to climb to the top of the world, never realizing that he had already been handed the keys to the kingdom. He just threw them away for a cheap thrill in the snow. David's devastating downfall is the ultimate reminder that ego is the fastest path to destruction. He threw away a loyal, loving marriage for a fleeting ego boost, only to discover that the woman he underestimated was the true architect of his world. Serafina's brilliant, icy revenge proves that true power doesn't need to boast. It simply waits for the right moment to strike. Loyalty is priceless, and betrayal always comes with a terrifyingly high bill. If you loved this story of epic karma and sweet revenge, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more real-life drama stories. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were Serafina? Let us know.